I wasn't always afraid. As a kid, I was pretty wild, actually. The kind of wild that got me into fights, into preschool already. Of course, my parents were not very happy with this. So the next day, after one of those fights, my mom said, if you behave tomorrow, your dad will take you fishing. Now, I really loved fishing. So the next day, the good boy was born. And many years later, sorry, many years later, unfortunately, I learned that good boys don't become good men. The next day, the self-betrayal, let's call it like this, was pretty immediate. My parents have obviously accepted, the new me, but the kids not so much. So I lost respect. Eventually, I got ostracized and bullied. So little me at the time, I started to retreat into silence and eventually into nature, because nature was the place where I could sort of maintain some of my wildness. But then a few years later, as I got interested in women, of course, I realized I had no idea how to relate or communicate with them whatsoever. I made myself so small that I became invisible to most of them. There was a few, I got lucky a few times. I thought it was a miracle or something. But most relationships didn't last very long at all. And with each heartbreak, it confirmed what I already believed, which was, I'm not worthy. And the following years, in order to self-protect, I told myself that being small was a virtue. But of course, shame is not humility. And deep down, I knew this. And this is where I became a seeker. Then, trying to make sense of this world that I felt so estranged from, I started to experiment with plant medicine. Several ones, including ayahuasca. And this really opened my mind in so many ways, up to all kinds of knowledge and experiences and practices, including semen retention. So semen retention was an absolute game changer for me at the time, and still is. It really made me discover my body in ways that I didn't experience before. It was a bit like discovering my superpowers, let's say, and it didn't solve my problems, but it did give me something that I didn't have before, which was courage. And in this case, the courage to face, which was at the time my biggest fear, my fear of rejection. And quickly after that, this courage was rewarded, and which means that I was finally able to attract women, communicate with them, have relationships that somewhat lasted. And for the first time, I felt confident and powerful. And most of all, I felt worthy. Now, I wasn't oblivious to the fact that it was quite a superficial pursuit, but I just conquered my biggest fear. And so I did really feel like I was moving in the right direction. And then New Age spirituality and later Tantra promised to take me deeper on this journey. I wasn't quite sure though what I was chasing, but I just knew that I wanted more of that. And also, like, the tantric pursuit often wraps itself in all kinds of mystical language. For example, it doesn't promise power, it promises empowerment. Instead of money, it's abundance. Instead of sex, it's divine union or enlightenment. And so, seduced by these words of grandeur, I was hooked. Ultimately, I think that we tend to suppress aspects of ourselves along the way as we grow up, as a way to function in the environment, that we grow up in. And so I guess I was, like many other people, looking for these missing pieces, right? And then the New Age promises that if you find yourself, you will find God, because it's kind of the same thing. So it's a win-win, very hard to argue with that. It's very easy to glorify this quest as something noble, but it leads to only one thing, which is self-worship. And this becomes painfully obvious when you look around at the spiritual community. My vibration is higher than your vibration. It's extremely narcissistic. And I saw this early on, but I thought I could set myself apart by exploring traditional Tantra, which I supposedly was the real deal, right? But still, a few years later, I realized it all, when you dive deep enough, you'll see that it all shares the same root, and it all takes you right back to where it all began. The Genesis story, the tree, and the serpent, and the lie of the serpent. And it's always the same lie. And the serpent answers the question basically of, am I worthy? And it goes like, are you kidding me? You're God. Or am I loved? And the snake's like, you are love. So it's extremely seductive. It's very enticing. And so this is the delusion, this is the self-intoxication that separated us from God in the first place. And this lie has been going on repeat ever since, to this very day. Just different ways, different words, but it's at the core, it's always the same lie. But after 15 years, I just realized, wait a minute, I didn't become a better person, actually. The highs are temporary, and I've become a slave to my practice. And in a way, you could say that the New Age is almost like any other works-based religion. You have to work your way to heaven, or in this case, enlightenment. And so it reaffirms this belief of, I am not worthy, therefore I need to do X, Y, Z. And so it's a loop, it's a mental prison. Many people call it the false light. So it's essentially just darkness masquerading as light. Then 2020 came along, the year of the pandemic, or was it 2019? But anyway, it was also the year that I became a father. And this was really the reality check that I desperately needed, because I realized that I was not as resilient and spiritually evolved as I thought I was. And on top of that, unfortunately, it was also an unplanned pregnancy. So it completely shattered my identity at the time as this sexual mastery expert who supposedly is in control of everything, right? Also, the relationship was not very healthy, but I decided to stay because I really wanted to be there for the little one. But after 2 years, I really hit a breaking point, and I decided that it was better to go separate ways. I still maintain the relationship to my daughter to this day as much as I can. And I believe it was the right decision, but nevertheless, it broke something in me. And this is where insomnia entered my life. Not just a few days or weeks or even months, but years. It became a chronic condition, unrelenting. And it's very hard to put into words the kind of agony and despair I experienced. There was not a place on this earth that I could put my head down and rest. And day and night just became one endless stream of suffering. And of course, everyone has a solution. If you tell them about insomnia, everybody has a solution. Like, did you try melatonin? Yeah, I did actually. Amongst many other solutions. Like it's endless. You can look endlessly for sleep remedies, and nothing worked. I wouldn't say I was suicidal, but thinking of death was sometimes gave me peace, just knowing that one day it would end, at least. I didn't give up though. I kept looking in places that I never looked before. And I heard about Christ, obviously, who hasn't? But somehow, when I opened up scripture again, I guess I just had ears to hear this time. And here was this God who didn't necessarily promise to take away my suffering, but who would suffer with me and who is suffering with me. The story of Christ really is really able to integrate suffering in a way that it becomes meaningful, unlike any other story that I ever encountered. Now, meaningless suffering is absolute poison, but meaningful suffering can become medicine. And in this, I recognized that this must be the greatest love story of all time. Not some wishy-washy definition of love, but a real, tangible expression of love made manifest through the body of Christ. And just like any other father, it's not just unconditional love, like there's rules, but I understood that these rules are not against us, they're for us. They're not to limit us, they are here to protect us. And same with sex, like it's not the rules and restrictions around sex doesn't mean that sex is bad. It's actually the opposite. It means that sex is so good and so sacred that it needs protection. As far as the insomnia, it didn't miraculously disappear as too much of my dismay. And I really wrestled with God for months to come. Like, I didn't understand, like, how can God allow so much suffering that affects so many people around me, including my daughter at the time. But eventually I understood that He wanted me to overcome this myself. But unlike before, overcome this with Him, not without Him, so that I could claim this victory for myself, but without pride. And so eventually I did, through unwavering amounts of faith and deep surrender. This doesn't mean, though, that the practices and the tools are not useful. It's just that sometimes we face challenges that are so big and that no amount of effort will help you get through it. They are invitations to go deeper into deeper surrender. Insomnia was one of them, and actually a lot of the challenges around sexuality are similar. More effort doesn't mean more results. For example, premature ejaculation. More effort rarely results in a solution. They're invitations for deeper surrender and relaxation. Now, of course, some practices had to go, not because they didn't work, but because they come at the expense of my connection to God. And one of those is Kundalini, the other one, sex magic. I don't involve myself with those anymore. And it does take discernment to understand each practice in the right context, and to know whether they are helpful or harmful. And more than anything, it's about order. like God first, everything else second, including sex. Sex has a place, of course, in this divine order. But what I had seen many times before is that in the attempt to make sex sacred, it gets demonized and it becomes an idol. Same with a lot of the practices; they're not the holy grail, but they can be useful in the right context and in the right place. And it's a fine line that requires nuance, and this is why I do hesitate sometimes to wear the Christian label, not because I don't believe, but because very few people can hold this nuance. You're either part of the Christian purity culture, or you're part of the New Age hedonism movement. Now, from working with men for the past 8 years, I can say that it's a common challenge to integrate one's sexuality. And it seems that sex is often one of these things that is left towards the very end to be dealt with, like the final missing piece of the puzzle. And so a lot of the men, perhaps you as well, they're not new and they've already done a lot of the work. And so perhaps instead of more growth, they're looking for more depth. They know sex is sacred, but are not entirely sure what that means or what that looks like. But they know that it's not sexual suppression or sexual liberation. And this then becomes the invitation, right, into this liminal space, to explore this liminal space together, which is the path of sexual mastery and integration, where we embrace our desire, but without being governed by it, so that we can truly say yes to sex, not from a place of compulsion, but from choice, which then enables us to fully experience and receive this gift that God has given us. Now, I know that this path is not for everyone. It's a narrow path for a reason, but I know that for the ones willing to walk it, they will never define sex and experience sex the same way ever again. And that is the discipline of desire. Thanks for watching. If any of this resonated with you, feel free to drop a comment or a like. There is a free training in the bio somewhere about overcoming lust, but without killing your desire. And of course, for the ones that want to dive deeper, I'm available for one-on-one as well. And other than that, I just hope you enjoy the rest of the content, and I'll see you around.